I'm with 82% of Americans, and where we need to be putting money into people's hands during the pandemic. And I am thrilled that at least some members of Congress, including Bernie and Ed Markey, and Kamala in the Senate, and then in the House, it's Ro Khanna, AOC, Tim Ryan, Earl Blumenauer, and others, have gotten behind these emergency money for the people acts and bills, which would put $2,000 a month in the hands of everyone for the duration of the pandemic until we return to pre-pandemic employment levels. Let's just do that. It's so obvious that we should be doing something exactly like this. Other countries have been doing things much like this. When you talk about trying to bail out small businesses or bail out airlines, like, we should be bailing out ourselves and our families. And if you took care of all the people that were in these organizations, then the organizations can reorganize and figure things out without worrying about the fact that millions more are going to lose their livelihoods. So why have we not passed the Emergency Money for the People Act? And I have some theories as to why, but that's where I am right now, Briahna.
I want to run through some recent history so that we're all on the same page here, because this is very, very complex, the legislative responses to COVID. The CARES Act passed in March, a $2 trillion bill that included the Paycheck Protection Act for small businesses, the $1,200 one-time payment for every American making under a certain amount, the airline bailout, $150 billion to states, and a top-up to unemployment insurance. Also included $500 billion to the Federal Reserve to create what is essentially a $4 trillion unregulated, unsupervised, no oversight slush fund to keep big business afloat. That was the sweetener to get Republicans on board. And I knew people then, progressives, socialists, who called this criminal and were pissed off that Bernie voted for it. I took a more generous view at the time, that if that's what it takes to prevent the total collapse of society, to prevent tens of millions from sliding into abject poverty, then it's worth it. I think that's a defensible vote. The CARES Act unemployment money ran out in July. The states have been scrambling for money to fill the role that the federal government should be filling in terms of getting money in people's pockets, and they're going deeply into debt to do it. Trump famously offered money to the red states by executive order, and that ran out pretty quick. In May, the House passed a $3 trillion bill to keep the money flowing. It includes $1 trillion to state, local, tribal governments, $200 billion in hazard pay for frontline workers, $75 billion for COVID testing, tracing, $100 billion for low-income rent support to keep people in their homes, $75 billion for homeowners, and more direct payments, including a $1,200 cash transfer for each dependent, up to $6,000 for each household. That's the putting money in people's pockets. The Senate said no, Trump said no, and that's been the case ever since. It has been 5 months since the House bill was passed, 3 months since the unemployment cash ran out. I'm sorry for all the numbers, but I know you're a numbers guy like me, so I'm sure you appreciate the backstory.
I appreciate it a great deal. And that's not the backstory. That's just this devastating reality for millions of Americans where they're looking up saying, wait a minute, I got a check in April or May and it's October now, and what the hell's going on? I think someone did the math and said that we gave people the equivalent of $6 a day or something along those lines, which ran out months ago. So, Virgil, I think that background is not, that's the foreground, really. I mean, that's just the reality we're facing right now. And I'm angry about it. We should all be angry about it. And it is mind-boggling why there's not more urgency right now, because if we don't pass a bill before the election, I think there's a window of time right now before the election, because Trump is desperate for anything that shows that, he's doing something for people, and he's salivating at the idea of sending checks to people with his name on it. I do not care whose name is on the check. If the check is good, send the check. You can do whatever you want to the check, as long as it actually helps people pay their bills. But then if we don't get it done by the time this election's up, then you're in a lame duck session. You have a lot of people who've just lost office. What is their urgency going to be to pass relief then? And so you could be waiting until a new Congress gets seated and gets the ball rolling, because this stuff's not instantaneous. You could be looking at a wait till February and people receiving aid in mid to late February or even later. So everyone just think about the winter. Right now it's October, November, December, January, February. That's 4 long months of people not getting anything. And most reasonable people thought that some version of the Heroes Act was going to get approved months ago. So, like commentators were like, oh yeah, that like Congress is dysfunctional, but they're not that dysfunctional. And then here we are.
Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump, they don't want to pass the House bill. And in their skinny version of the House bill, they want to cut unemployment benefits, cut the unemployment benefit top up, because they believe that the 600 adding $600 a week to people's unemployment benefits becomes a disincentive to go to work. They don't want the aid to the states and localities, which are going bankrupt. They don't want the hazard pay. They don't want the renter help. They don't want foreclosure help. They don't want to fund the post office. Their offer is a second $1,200 one-time payment, $400 top-up of unemployment benefits. At least I think it is, because it's the offer's changing every single day based on what the president
every
tweets.
day.
So you told Pelosi to take the deal. But why is deal worse than no deal here? A bad deal. And keep in mind, this is a bad deal. This is not nearly enough.
I think that we should be doing something very, very close to what the Dems proposed with the Heroes Act. $3 trillion headline number, fine. The composition of it, great. So ideally, we'd have passed that. Trump proposed a $1.8 trillion deal that had some good, some problems with it. Mitch McConnell responded like unacceptable, too high a price tag, non-starter in the Senate. And that was the deal I said, Nancy, you should take this deal, because this deal had $400 a week in enhanced federal unemployment benefits. It had another $1,200 stimulus. It had $300 billion for states and local governments. And if you pass this deal now and you're Nancy Pelosi, and as I believe will happen, Trump loses and you get a Democratic Congress, then you can pass another deal, but at least people would have had like a lifeboat between November and February. And to the extent you had problems with this deal, you can make another deal, because I think that Dems are going to control the Congress.
Now, when you ran for president, you famously proposed a $3 trillion UBI, universal basic income, $1,000 to every American every month. And you insisted on it being deficit neutral. You wanted to pay for it through, among other mechanisms, consumption tax, VAT, value-added tax, that's a consumption tax essentially, and entitlement cuts. After watching Congress pass $3 trillion in March, and now that you're advising them to pass a $2 trillion compromise right now, none of which is paid for, just goes on the national debt, have you rethought your position that a UBI must be paid for by new revenues?
Right now, we're in crisis mode. The house is on fire, and you don't worry about how much water you're using to put out the fire when your house is on fire. So right now, whatever heroic measures are required to help keep families, communities, the economy afloat, you just do. And you figure it out later. One of the reasons I'm for a value-added tax so strongly, which you could, by the way, exempt consumer staples, food, diapers, etc., from it, and which we should do, because you don't need to increase the tax of that stuff, is that right now you have Amazon and Netflix, these trillion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar businesses paying zero in taxes, and as far as we can tell, that's actually correct by the rules. Their accountants just say, look, it all went through Ireland, it all went through the Bahamas. And so you have to look at the rest of the world and say, well, why did they not have this problem? And they didn't have this problem because they have a VAT. And then the companies just shrug and say, okay, I guess we're paying taxes. So there are ways to structure a consumption tax that falls on folks that, frankly, like they're just going to pay it and it's not going to change their habits that much. I'm not someone who wants to increase the burden on the average American or like the, like working class, middle class. Like the goal would be to tailor a VAT so that it falls most heavily on folks who right now are laughing their way to the bank. But yeah, like I'm with you. Right now, we should just be like putting money into people's hands and worrying about the debt of the deficit at some point when we're not facing a catastrophic historic crisis.
Well, I agree that it's a crisis today, but before the pandemic, poverty was a crisis. Homelessness was a crisis. These continue to be crises. Why was that not enough of a crisis to justify deficit spending for a UBI before the pandemic?
I think it was. I know, and if you look at what I was proposing, I think there were ways that we could balance out the UBI in large part because putting the money into our hands actually grows the economy. It cuts the amount of stuff you have to spend on healthcare and incarceration and a lot of things we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on. And that was actually a lot of the reason why I cast it as deficit neutral is you actually had to incorporate all of the positive health effects and educational effects and mental health effects and social benefits of a universal basic income.